How
Yeah.
long might it take? Well, it took me 6 months to get rid of my steel-plated shoes and get some tennis shoes,
Right.
and a year to get to where the doctor said,
Is that
"You're,
right?
like, 99% done and, completely, cured here." You gotta
Yeah.
remember it's a drainage system, and it
Yeah.
took you years to get these diseases. These are
Yeah.
not something that came up one day.
You are listening to 5 a.m. podcast. Your morning motivation starts here.
Welcome back to the 5 a.m. podcast. I'm your host, as always, Michael Clausen. We talk a lot on this show about systems and performance, the discipline required to build something from nothing. But today, we're looking at a different kind of system failure and the man who found the workaround. In the late 1950s, a child was born at Camp Lejeune, and unbeknownst to him or his Marine Corps family, his bottles were filled with water that was contaminated by toxic chemicals. Now, decades later, that legacy surfaced as a dual diagnosis that would break most people: advanced stage Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Now, when the medical establishment told him, no, you'll just die, today's guest didn't accept that end-of-life notification. Instead, he leaned into his background as a database programmer. He treated his incurable disease much like a glitch in the code. He researched, he refined, and eventually engineered a proprietary ultra-chill milled technology that helped him run marathons and document what his doctors called an impossible reversal of his biological markers. He's the president of APDI, the founder of mybrainrestore.com. Markburnett, welcome to the 5am podcast.
Thank you for having me, Michael. I'm looking forward to doing this. This is gonna be good.
Oh, yeah. As I was preparing for this and putting that script together, we were talking about the genetic code. And recently I had a graduate of MIT from decades ago, Doug L., and he talked too about how we are this digital code that God put together. And of course, we have this fallen condition where bad things happen and bugs get into the code, just like we have to update our software on
Yep.
our devices. But Mark, you spent your career as a database programmer. When you received this dual diagnosis, did you immediately see your body as a system with a bug that just needed a better line of code?
Well, I saw what was out there. Basically, the doctor was handing me medicine that was made in the 60s. And I'm like, "You give this to everybody?" And they're like, "Yeah, that's the go-to product, cardopa, which is a dopamine replacement." And for me, that was like, "Well, is that gonna cure it?" They're like, "No." And you have to know my doctor. It was like, "Well, you gotta understand, we call it the honeymoon effect. So
Oh,
this will actually last about 5 years, and then it doesn't work as well as it used to. And you have to increase dosage, and when you do that, you get into bradykinesia and stuff, you start freezing, and you get into worse problems because your body doesn't control it naturally like God intended. That's the key. So for me, for that moment, there was that, wow, I'm defeated. I have two neurological diseases. I have Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. I have the gene for Alzheimer's. And so for me, the moment lasted as long as I got to the elevator of that doctor's building, where I'm the kind of person who was always in charge of numerous programmers developing code. There were bugs all the time. Anytime somebody came to me and said, "Oh, I write bug-free code," I laughed and said, "Nobody writes bug-free code."
yes.
For me, it was all about, how do I handle this? How do I look at it differently? How do I study it? So researching, being used to a blank screen, with the cursor just blinking in the corner and then making something magical out of it
Yeah.
was what I was used to doing.
Right. Yeah, that's good. And it sounds like that doctor had the bedside manner of a toothache or something. So it's good
Well,
that
let's
you
just
said
say,
no.
we just each other back and forth a number of times.
Okay, good, good. And it's good to have a relationship with a doctor that you can go back and forth with. Now, your neurologist was very blunt with his line of, no, you'll die. What
Right.
was that internal conversation like in that moment that led you to say, nope, I'm going to find a workaround. And instead, I don't need to prepare for the end. I need to find this workaround.
Well, I think part of it was first, realizing how bad I had Parkinson's. I had
Mm,
Parkinson's level 3, which is that one step literally away from a walker. I had to buy steel plated shoes, which are construction shoes. They're very heavy. They have the steel plates in front because I was busting my toes. I was falling down, things like that. And I learned, well, that was one thing I learned was that by putting on these 1.5 pound shoes on each foot, they actually made your foot rise a little higher. Okay.
mm,
In Parkinson's, or your body immediately understood the weight and tried to pull itself up a little bit further. So that was kind of my first thing, but I was still hurting myself. I was still couldn't pick up things. I work on motherboards and all that kind of stuff. So picking up screws is pretty much impossible. I have what's called pill roll, where you pick up something
mhm.
and do that. With the Alzheimer's, and the Alzheimer's was more, I was driving home down a road I've been down 20 years and forgot how to go home. And just came to that moment of and I'm a guy. I don't want to press Google and say, take me home. I'm
Yeah,
just going to keep
right.
driving until I run out of gas. But I made it home. But, my heart was pounding. I realized these two things were going to take me out completely. The combination was worse than just one,
Yeah.
although anyone by themselves is horrible. So for me, I dug into the research. I started looking. I came across, reports, one report that was out there where actually the Japanese had taken a natural plant and basically cured mice of Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and dementia. And to me, being someone involved with data, you look at that and go like, how could one thing cure three
Yeah.
different neurological diseases? It seemed impossible. There had to be a common denominator in there, but they didn't know that. They didn't understand that part. And all they did was eventually dissect the mice and realized, hey, everything's gone. The mice were better. Their memory got better. They could run mazes better. They knew all that, but they couldn't convert it into a $10,000 a month drug. They
Mm,
couldn't take apart God's nature's code.
yeah.
Okay. And turn into an expensive thing when it was already natural. And for me, although it was hard to find and source, I finally got the product in January 2025, and I was able to come up with the way of cold chill milling, which was really important to keep the product cold, to keep the natural oils and things like that. And this is what the product looks like
Okay.
essentially.
Wow.
Uh, let me show you. Like that's just a powder.
Wow.
Okay, we grind it. So my whole goal was let me try it on myself. That's what you do when
Mhm.
you're a database programmer too. You write your code, you get a blue screen to death, you go back and fix your code,
Mhm.
do all that. I did the same thing. I was like, okay, let's try it, let's see what happens. But in 2 months, my Alzheimer's got better. I could tell, that I
Hmm.
was thinking sharper. I was walking in a room, remember why I went in there, things of that order. And my Parkinson's, you don't notice being normal, but all of a sudden I started walking better and doing things better. And by 6 months of continually taking the product with no one else taking it, not putting it on the market, I ran in the Michael J. Fox Marathon and got a medal at the end. And
Wow.
that was when my first orders came there because people said, what in the world are you taking?
Mhm.
Because whatever it is, I want to get it. And I'm like, well, I'm taking this. I don't have a label for the jar.
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't care. Now we have a pretty label for it just was that combination. And then the combination that the Dutch had discovered of that common denominator. And
Hmm.
that common denominator was called the glymphatic system. And if you look up glymphatic system, you'll see that every scientist is studying that right now. They're starting to understand this could clear strokes from the brain. It could clear,
Wow.
football players who get the traumatic brain injuries. It could
Mhm.
help clear that. But more importantly for me, it cleared Parkinson's and Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And I had already had a friend die of dementia. So, and he had Parkinson's and dementia. So I knew how rough he went through that. I knew the drugs they give him were horrible. These things they invent and put out there, the side
Mhm.
effects are outrageous.
Yeah.
I mean, he was sicker from the side effects than what he had, but he passed, and on his death certificate, it said Parkinson's with dementia with Lewy bodies. And I
Hmm.
was unable to help him, with that because I hadn't discovered this yet.
Right.
But now, it was huge for me.
Yeah. Totally. Now, what age were you when you got that first diagnosis?
I was right about 65 when I discovered the Parkinson's component. And that came from really a smell test, which they do
Oh,
sometimes.
okay.
So they try to see if you're smelling good or not.
Yep.
And I was I was a control guinea pig for National Institutes of Health.
Okay.
I was brought in to, because I had never gotten COVID. So they were like, hey, we need some control guinea pigs. You want to be one? I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. And, but they were relentless at doing massive medical research on me. And they are the ones who spotted the smell test component. And they're like,
Wow.
You know, he might have Parkinson's. You might want to see a neurologist, you know, because that's not normal. And since you didn't have COVID, which we see
Mm.
that in, go see a neurologist. And I saw my GP first. He thought I had MS or Parkinson's, but
Wow.
eventually I got to the neurologist and they're like, no, you have Parkinson's. And then because I am involved in the litigation part of Camp Lejeune and being poisoned on base, basically from that, that base has a 70% higher amount of Parkinson's than any other base the military tested,
Wow.
which is amazing. So a lot of us have it, you know, unfortunately, and it's what's called a tier 1 disease. So
Yeah.
it's really bad.
Yeah. Serious
But
business.
a lot of that had to do with, you know, me trying to really understand the code, if you will, of how could I put these two reports together? And it really only took me a day to go. The Dutch were onto something, the Japanese were onto something, and in my database mind, that made the relationship table I
Right.
needed to see. And
Yeah.
bang, there it was, right in front of me. That made sense. Get the glymphatic system in your brain, get it moving, get it flowing, and that's probably what happened to the mice, but the Japanese never figured that part out.
Gotcha. So, ladies and gentlemen, obviously, as you can tell, this is an important conversation we're having today. It's about transformation. It's about beating a terminal diagnosis that so many people are getting, tearing families apart. So please, ladies and gentlemen, share this episode with your friends and families. This topic is too important to not share. So, Mark, what did you say that system was inside the body?
Yeah. It's similar to the lymphatic system, which people might
Okay.
be more familiar with, but this is actually called the glymphatic system, and it was named by the Dutch scientist in 2012. Now, that may sound like a
Mm,
long time ago, but in the
mm,
medical world, that's like yesterday.
Right.
That means nobody's really had a chance to study it, get involved in it yet, or anything like that. And they knew it was an aha moment at that time. And they named it that way because it was named after the cells that are surrounded by Parkinson's, and it would clear it out, the glia
Wow.
cells. So those cells essentially, that's why they named it what they named it. But they also nicknamed it, the scientists, the dishwasher of the brain, which I
Yeah.
thought was,
Okay. Oh,
but
that's really interesting.
that kind of made sense.
Yeah.
And what they really came up with that glymphatic system is these are things stuck in the brain. They don't move properly out.
Huh.
Chemicals damage them. This could be weed killers or, in my case, TCE, which unfortunately people don't realize. Yeah, I got it on the base, but it's also a brake cleaner fluid. So probably everybody's used it at one
Wow.
point in your life. It's actually in wig glue. Okay. So
Wow.
it's the chemical is everywhere. And the United States only got around to banning it in December of 2024. So it's still on people's shelves.
Well, that's really something. Now, I'm going to get into your research here because you were talking about how the Japanese had this oil, but there must have been some degradation or something that came from heat. And then you came up with this ultra chilled mill
Right.
process. Can you explain in layman's terms why keeping the ingredients cold during the grinding process is the difference between a useless powder and a life-changing nutraceutical?
Sure. Absolutely. Well, there's always different ways to look at this. You know, I mean, anytime you change, for instance, a good example, I'm allergic to pineapple. Okay.
Okay.
So if I eat a raw
Oh,
pineapple,
interesting.
mouth will break out. But you cook it in, you know, let's say sweet and sour pork, and there's
Okay.
pineapple in it, doesn't bother me at all. And I looked that up, and the heating process actually takes out the ingredient that causes that particular problem. My son's allergic to apples, which is very rare form of allergy. But when they're cooked in apple pie, or he goes to McDonald's and gets an apple pie, he can eat it no problem because it's cooked. But if he bit into a raw one, he'd break out. And
Wow.
so this was the opposite effect here, where actually keeping it cold was the preserving component, which the
Mm.
Japanese understood, but they just did it what's called cold milling, which is not as low temperature. They can still get up to like 120 degrees. So
Oh,
I
really?
did ultra chill milling, which essentially brings the mill down to, and the seeds down to about a 50 degrees.
Hmm.
And then we mill it. And this thing's moving at 30,000 revolutions per minute.
Wow.
You're grinding seed, it gets pretty hot.
Yes. Well, and speaking of apples and apple pie, anybody who I think me and the missus are going to make some apple pie, and we got to make some crust today. And so we know that we need really cold butter and really cold water so we get a
Yep.
flaky crust. And so
Yeah.
that temperature makes all the difference. But very interesting. I imagine it would be the bromelain or bromelain in the pineapple that caused your problem, your allergic reaction, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Was it the control mice where the memory improved by 20%, or is this like a GPU upgrade for the brain?
Well, actually, it's sort of the reverse. What
Okay.
happens is the scientists they focused on the Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and dementia mice that they had.
Okay.
They got what's called transgenic mice, which basically means they were bred to have Parkinson's or
Ah.
these diseases ahead of time. So they would purchase them, with the diseases in place. And then they cured 100% of those mice from Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and dementia, not 20%. But what they decided to do when they got done curing all those mice and they had
Mhm.
control mice, which had no diseases whatsoever, they decided, well, what happens when you give it to the control mice?
Mhm.
And they could run complicated mazes and what they call a water maze, where they put the mouse in like an aquarium and there's a ladder in the aquarium. So the mouse has to
Okay.
figure out how to go get out of there. Okay. And they found that they could do it 20% quicker. What they came out of that was that this was helping memory in normal people. So that's why we have a preventive version.
Mm.
And this is what also the Japanese thought, that a lower dose of the same product would work to prevent these things from happening. Let's say genetically you're predisposed or your family members have Parkinson's or Alzheimer's.
Mhm.
Well, this could prevent that from ever even taking place. But if you
Wow.
have it or you're already at that level, most of the time in Parkinson's people, 50% of the dopamine producing cells in the brain are already
Mhm.
gone. Your body's been able to try to make up for it during that time, but that's when you start noticing these effects like loss of smell
Wow.
and balance issues. So you're already 50% in when you get to that point. You're already in trouble. So that's why we have the 2X active, which is it's the same jar as this. This is the preventive and active. We just give you a second jar.
Ah.
So we don't change the product inside. Okay. We just give you more of the same product to have a higher dose. And we found that's what I took to run that Michael J. Fox marathon. And
Mm.
something that's not in my notes, because you didn't know this when we got scheduled, was I went to see my neurologist just a week ago, and they basically said, they put me through all the tests. They said, I can barely, I'm not even going to call you stage 1. You're like
Wow.
below stage 1. I don't know what you are. All I can say is you have completely reversed it. In my opinion, you have all your strength back, all your balance. You passed every test I just gave you.
Mhm.
And she goes, the only thing I noticed was a mild tremor in your hand. Okay. And she said, that I'm not even worried about. Who cares? I mean, maybe that'll go away at some point if you keep
Yeah.
taking it. But she goes, that's nothing compared to the fact that you can run in the Michael J. Fox marathon. I clean the gutters, on a 20-foot ladder, something you're really not supposed to
Yeah.
do when you have Parkinson's.
Right.
Not a good
Okay.
idea,
So
but
then
I could.
with the preventative component
Mhm.
of this, and ladies and gentlemen, fair warning, I did not even know we were going to get into a preventative part of this. So have there been, you mentioned the mice that were not predisposed to the disease and they were swimming. And I know mice are not known for their swimming capabilities
No.
at all.
Very
So they were able to stay afloat and get to a ladder, which means they were using all their 5 senses that they have. Can you tell us if any studies have been done on how this actually improves quality of life or function for people that are taking it as a preventative and have no diagnoses at all?
Well, what I've noticed, and this is coming from different people with different issues, okay?
Okay.
And some of those issues are like long-term COVID,
Mm,
type of things where they get the brain fog, okay?
mm.
Or they're people that are studying for exams or programmers, always looking to sharpen their then
Yeah.
gamers are always
Yes.
looking to sharpen, the ability to move quicker and do things quicker. So that's where we're picking up some people using the preventive, but also that would also be people that in genetically predisposed.
Hmm.
Like I was predisposed to Alzheimer's, but I didn't have this product at that time.
Right.
So I couldn't take it to stop from that happening. Now, I learned about that strangely enough from 23andMe. 23andMe had my genes a long time, and they all of a sudden put in there that now here's Alzheimer's things we did on your genes. And that's
Mm.
where I got, oh, by the way, I have the PEO4 gene, which increases the likelihood, I think, by 15% that you would get Alzheimer's. But for me, it was 100.
Wow. Okay, so now one component of this, and I already did the call out to those who are listening, because there's a lot of family givers and
Mhm.
family members and caregivers who are dealing with a loved one that has some of these debilitating conditions.
Yeah.
And you've talked a lot about families and caregivers in your work. Why was it so important for you to design this as a powder that can be mixed like into somebody's yogurt? It could be mixed into smoothies, maybe some mashed potatoes,
Yeah,
rather than
not hot.
not hot. Okay, that's good. Thanks for thanks for doing that. I was just
Ice
thinking
cream's fine.
whatever ice cream and maybe some we have some cream in the fridge. So if you're going to make some
Yeah,
whipped cream or something, it could go all those delicious things that we have. Can you
right.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, part of that came from understanding my friend who passed away.
Mm.
And I saw his caregiver just overwhelmed. I mean, she
Ah,
was working. Okay. He was, walking around the house and doing things, but sometimes he'd get out or he'd take off, or we had to put a
yeah,
tracker on him, to try to find him. She was always worried about him. And then, of course, she's trying to take care of him at the same time. And she did have a nurse coming in, but they were only there sometimes. You can only afford so much, you
right.
know. And so she was just overwhelmed. I mean, she barely got sleep kind of thing. I saw that, but I also saw him because he had dementia with Lewy bodies, which is much
Mm.
worse in some ways, but similar to Alzheimer's. And it's a component of dementia, actually. The one thing, if he didn't like food, if he didn't like this food, like you brought him this and
Yep.
he didn't like it, boom, it hit the wall.
Ah,
Because those people get very angry. They get very much in a situation where they feel they're lost
mhm.
or they don't understand. Sometimes he would lash out at her. He didn't even understand that was his wife.
Yeah,
So he
right.
would tell her, "Get out of my house. Why are you in my house? Who are you?" And he would do that. He would argue with mirrors. He would do all that kind of stuff. He'd sit there for hours talking to a mirror.
Mm.
It's so horrible that
Mhm.
they can't take care of themselves. And so part of the reason for the powder, the component, was I understood Parkinson's have trouble swallowing. That's number one,
Ah,
because they
okay.
lose this muscle reflex. So pills can get stuck and then they gag or get stuck, or, they're
Yep,
like a cat with a hairball.
right. Yes.
And I've had that happen to me. So I know what that's like. So to me, putting it in a powder and putting it in something that the caregiver could say, "Hey, here's your pudding you like, or the flavor you like, a
Ah,
yogurt."
yeah,
That was key. And it doesn't really change the flavor that much. And you only need like 2 tablespoons of the actual yogurt. Don't use the whole yogurt or the whole pudding, just a
ah,
little
okay.
bit mixed in with our powder, 4 scoops of our powder. You
Mm.
mix it in, it blends in perfectly. Unlike a protein shake, which clumps,
Yep,
this doesn't.
right.
It blends nice. And then they don't taste it. And
Wow,
so it allows the caregiver to give them something where normally they might throw it around or get rid of
right.
it or not understand why you're giving it to them. Food they understand. Even someone with Alzheimer's understands, oh, you got some yogurt, you got some pudding, good. That they don't forget, surprisingly.
Wow, wow. And so I'm sure that there's somebody listening that's saying, "Michael, how do I get in touch with Mark?" So we still got a ways to go, ladies and
Sure.
gentlemen, in this conversation. But Mark, please tell the ladies and gentlemen how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah. The best way is to go right here to mybrainrestore.com, because I named it that because that's what it did for me. That's
Mm,
how it got its name. It restored my brain. That's what I decided to call it. If they go to that site, I'll give them a little clue. If they go to FAQs, then they click on free PDFs, they can download my 2026 book
okay.
free, no charge for that. And they can read about everything and how I got it and what I did. Plus, also, there's FAQ up there for health providers. There's
Mm,
FAQ up there for people taking it to understand the different things and how to take it. So I always tell, that's the first step you got to do. You got to feel
right.
comfortable with it. And then if you want to purchase it, the purchasing component's right there at the tab. But more
Mhm,
importantly, we don't hide. Our phone number's right at the top. And
yep,
we do that because we don't hide behind AI in that regard. We're not a company that won't answer the phone. Sometimes they get me or they get one of my helpers, and we
right.
enjoy. Even before I got on here, I had people. I was on the phone with 2 different people right
Yeah,
back to back. one, was like, just saw her doctor, and the doctor was like, "You're doing better. Just stick on with the My Brain Restore. I
Yeah.
can't help you anymore. I don't have anything that's gonna do what that's doing. So just stick with it."
Right.
And I think doctors are starting to accept it, but then again, a lot of doctors don't, and you gotta fight for your position. We have something here natural that works, and sometimes they shy away from that.
Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com. Mark went from wearing steel-plated running shoes to running marathons. Whether you're looking for that GPU upgrade for your own cognitive performance, or you're fighting a diagnosis that experts are calling impossible, it's time to rewrite your code. Head over to mybrainrestore.com/5am podcast. That's the special 5am podcast link. That address again is mybrainrestore.com/5am podcast to start your own system recovery. High performance starts with a clean system. Don't just manage the symptoms, restore the source. 5am podcast is brought to you in part by mkci.ca, a certified member of the Autodesk Developer Network. MKCI helps companies maximize their AutoCAD, Inventor, Navisworks, and other design software investments. Their innovative products like the CommandSys script editor and the Clash Management Suite will streamline your workflow and boost your productivity. Visit mkci.ca today to discover how they can enhance your competitive CAD advantage. That's mkci.ca. Thank you for your support of 5am podcast. We're talking about a plant from the forest. I was thinking of in Genesis 1:29, where God actually said to Adam and Eve, "I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the earth, and every tree whose fruit contains seeds, they shall be your food." And so there's life-sustaining provision there, just in what God has created us. And of course, there's the quote that says, "Let food be thy medicine."
Yes.
We're surrounded in a world of good and evil, of abundance and stealing, killing, and destroying. And what a wonderful thing that you have found, and the researchers in Japan and in Holland have found this compound. And how did you get the idea to super chill mill the compound?
Right. Ultra chill mill.
Yeah.
The reason we did that was that the Japanese scientists were definitely touchy about the heat effect.
Okay.
They realized that heat had prevented this from ever being discovered because traditionally it had been used as a hot tea, the fruit from that particular seed. And the seed itself, sometimes they would cook it, they would fry it, and sometimes then they would make it into a tea. So it was always made into a hot tea. So unlike cardopa, which was what your doctor is going to give you from the 60s, that was actually in India. It was a plant in India, just same thing. God had already made it 1,000 years ago. Someone discovered it, that it stopped tremors. And the British rediscovered it, I say that loosely, 100 years ago, and realized, hey, that stops tremors. And they started giving it to people that had tremors, and it worked. And eventually that became cardopa or dopamine. But the problem with that is it's sort of like taking insulin for diabetes. In other words, you're just replacing what your body should naturally make, but you're not really fixing the core problem. And the core problem in that particular case is your pancreas is not making any insulin. Where Ozempic, as an example, if you take Ozempic, all of a sudden you start making your own insulin again. Even though they thought those cells were dead, you could never recover from it. If you do that, then your body starts making its own, and your doctor will take you off insulin because then you're going to overdose. You're going to have too much. And this is the problem with dopamine or cardopa itself, is that medicine works the same way. You take too much insulin, you're in trouble. Okay, you're going to crash. Same with this. You take too much dopamine. That's why they call it the honeymoon effect. You're going to freeze because your body's getting way too much dopamine. And the doctor's upping the dose until he can't up it anymore. And I've heard people taking, oh my gosh, I have one guy who's taking our product who has a pump installed, and he hits the pump with the dopamine already in the pump, and he has to hit it every 3 hours. Once he started taking what we had, he immediately, within like 2 months, was sitting here going, hey, I only have to press it. I noticed, every 6 hours, and then it went to every 8 hours.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden he's like, this is obviously, he got his doctor involved and me involved. We all got involved. He actually bought me tickets and said, come on down and see me. And literally we sat at a table with a bunch of other people and they all were like, wow, this is amazing, but, and I said to the doctor, is this any placebo effect or anything? And he goes, no, it couldn't be. It can't.
Right.
He goes, you either need the dopamine or not. Something's working. So there was a lot of excitement there, obviously, and a lot of interest in that. And that came from someone who had already gone to all that trouble to get a
Mhm.
pump and put in and everything so they could have that much dopamine. But
Right.
it's a losing effect. Again, let's get back to, the Bible. Let's get back to
Yeah.
what God said and put the 2 points you put together.
Yeah.
And, that's your medicine. And so many drugs come from plants.
Mhm.
They do. But then they get caught up in big pharma. And the
Yes.
reason the Japanese experiment got tossed was they could not take apart what God built. It's just that simple. They said
Yeah.
that. And they said, we couldn't figure it out. Big pharma dropped the ball and said, okay, can't figure it out. Well, abandon the
Mhm.
report. But I got a hold of the report. Okay.
Yeah.
And then when I read it, the scientist actually in that report actually said in one sentence, this should be a supplement. So the team realized that he couldn't get where they wanted to get, but they also know that this should be that. But the ball got dropped.
Yeah.
Nobody did it. And that's where I came in and picked it up. And then I realized, well, how do I improve upon what they had? Because what they understood is the oils and the components in this powder, when the seed is ground, okay, in this powder here, which I should focus, that is a very fine powder we do, and it will get quite hot when we mill it. So because of the temperature issue, the whole idea was to make it so it was cold mill, ultra chill mill, and we trademarked that and everything. We did our patents and everything. But I mean, we moved from that to realizing very early on that that's the way it had to be. And that made it the most potent and kept those ingredients the way they should be, the way God intended them, if you will,
Yeah. Right.
as pure as possible.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Friends, I'm speaking with Mark Burnett. We would love to hear your comments on this conversation. It's a very important topic that touches probably every family within
Yeah.
listening or download area of this. And, I think our top 3 countries are the United States, Philippines, Canada, and the list goes on from there. And I am sure that everyone listening knows someone that has or is dealing with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or something related to it. Now, Mark, you had mentioned multiple sclerosis as a possible diagnosis. Do you think that this compound from this plant
Would work.
would work on those as well?
Well, I already have people buying it for that purpose.
Okay.
And some of them are all around the world, and they're buying it because they have someone who has multiple sclerosis, or they do. The Dutch scientists basically had touched on that in the glymphatic system, and scientists that are now studying that realize that MS, although it is a disease that gets away the insulation from your nerves, and
Yes,
so that
that's
can
right.
be everywhere. That can be part of it, and a big part. But what they realized, the glymphatic system was also affected. So that if you could clear the glymphatic system, then multiple sclerosis would essentially get better and may actually reverse a lot of the components of it. So we have people trying it for that and using it. And I understand when they call me or they text me or whatever, they're like, I don't have much choices here. I'd be willing to give it a try. How
Yeah.
long might it take? Well, it took me 6 months to get rid of my steel-plated shoes and get some tennis shoes,
Right.
and a year to get to where the doctor said,
Is that
you're
right?
like 99% done and, completely cured here. So it does take time, but you got to remember it's a drainage system, and
Yeah.
it took you years to get these diseases. So these
Yeah.
are not something that came up one day. In my case, I was poisoned before I was born because my mom was on base. So I was in utero, getting the water. So unfortunately, I had early symptoms that no one recognized at all. They're like, no one
Right.
20 years old or 30 years old should have these symptoms, but they didn't put it down as early Parkinson's because they're like, that's impossible. They didn't understand.
Right.
So I think we have to understand with anything neurological in the brain, that a lot of these things could be that new system that was discovered that are blocking it from moving the way it's supposed to. And I encourage people to try it and let us know so we can pass on that information to other people. We're very
Yeah.
big into that. We want them to keep logs. We encourage them to say, before you start, write down, give a 10 for your worst situation. If your worst situation is tripping, put it as a 10. 2 months down the road, you don't trip as much. And I didn't notice it at first. You don't notice being normal.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm like, hey, I didn't trip this week, or I didn't fall downstairs, or, I didn't have to hold on to the guardrail. And in my video, if you look up jumping up a flight of stairs there really fast, and no one with stage 3 Parkinson's could do that. So I asked them to rate it. And since people have been doing that, we now are seeing people saying, wow, I noticed I moved the scores. I moved the needle. I had to go further than that, though, because part of my thing is to post all my medical records. So you can't measure Parkinson's except clinically to a point. Now, I did take the advanced test for Parkinson's and it came back 100% for Parkinson's, okay? And that's the CIS-1 test. But the Alzheimer's test is the amyloid beta 40 test, which is a blood test. So it's pretty easy to take. And I had taken it real early in 2023 and was in the red, okay? And I talked to my doctor and I said, I want to retake the test. I've been taking my brain restore. And they're like, no, you can't change it. Doesn't change. And so I'm not going to order and get in trouble with the insurance company. So I called around to 10 online doctors, finally got one that said, give me $20 and I'll get you the prescription. The other way that works. And so they did. They got me the same exact test I had gotten in 2023, and the needle moved by 10% in my favor. And so I'm the first person in the world that has changed that score according to Google, because I Googled it and it's like, it's not changeable. It's not. Once you get there, you don't go back. So I'm getting ready to take that test next week. Again, this will be my 3rd time. Plan to keep chasing it and keep posting it because I may be the first person that the Alzheimer's Association wants to award a white flower to the first person to beat Alzheimer's. I plan to get that white flower.
Well, from our lips to God's ears, may that indeed take place. So, Mark, you went from falling, going up and down the stairs, and then you completed a marathon, the Michael J. Fox Marathon. Can you describe maybe a specific moment when you realized your balance control had returned?
Well, before doing that particular run, because I'd never done any running or jogging, and I didn't even prep for any to do it.
Okay.
My wife was like, don't do it. You're going to fall down and break your face and break your neck trying to do this. And I'm like, no, I don't fall downstairs anymore. I'm perfectly balanced. I can stand on one leg and stay balanced. I could see it. I could feel it. And I felt it was worth going there with a number of other people with Parkinson's and just seeing how I could do. Now, a lot of people run for people for Parkinson's. The Parkinson's people are not always in the race, but I was in the race and I made it all the way through. And they literally handed me a medal at the end, which I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even expect that. But they're like, yeah, you did it, man. You did good. And that was the moment where I really was like, I got it. I beat this. It was my goal in a way, I had set. And that's when I released the product in June 1st of 2025. I started, actually, because people were asking for it, releasing it. People who meet me are like, I don't even know you have Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. I don't even see it. Yeah, you can see how I am here. Yeah.
Great.
I should be not here.
Yeah. Do you get some of those thoughts in your head of, man, what would have happened if I had not been given this idea and formulated this product?
Well, I'm afraid it would have ended up like my friend. And that's where I was headed. There was no doubt. I knew that would be, the end. I would go to stage 4, I would go to stage 5, and then I would, have to have a caregiver taking care of me. And I really didn't want to put that burden on my wife.
Yeah.
I think part of that was the motivation too. But then again, for people who are caregivers, if you can just have a person go to the bathroom by themselves, button their own shirt, things of that order, do just normal things or get their own food, that changes everything. Just that one person put it, I thought the best. If you could help someone 10 or 20% get better when they're that bad, that's a godsend. right
It's
there,
enormous.
for the caregiver.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you then about the glymphatic system.
Mhm.
How does your supplement then interact with the brain's waste management or the glymphatic system to clear out those amyloid plaques? So I guess it's like we have teeth, we have plaque in our mouth and plaque in our brain. Is that it?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and in our heart.
And our heart too, yes.
Yeah, cholesterol. Yeah, these are normal plaques and things that are in the body normally. So someone, let's say 30 years old, wouldn't necessarily have this kind of problem
Yeah.
where their body would, that glymphatic system would be working. It moves everything out of the brain normally, and then it moves it to the bloodstream, and then the liver breaks it down. So that's a
Mm,
normal system of
okay.
how the body handles these plaques. But just like a heart, with cholesterol, if you clog it, you have a heart attack, or worse yet,
Yes.
And so this is a system that basically is clogged for some reason, and it's probably has an incredible amount to do with chemicals in our environment.
Mm,
They're man-made. Like for me, it
yeah.
was TCE, but they're already Harvard was already working on a study noticing people around golf courses were getting Parkinson's. People around industrial
Wow.
places were getting Parkinson's, and one called it a Parkinson's pandemic because forever chemicals, things of that, they get stuck. And when these things get stuck, and you can imagine any filter, which this is essentially. It
Hmm.
filters, it pumps it
Yeah.
out. It works mainly at night. Most people, I always tell people to always use a wedge pillow if you can, in
Oh,
addition to taking our product, because that props your head up a little bit, keeps that
okay.
gravity working as the
Yeah.
glymphatic system likes to
Wow.
work when you're sleeping.
Hmm.
So that's when it does its cleanup routine. If it can't do it, then you're in a situation where it's only going to get worse and worse.
Wow. So now you've been very clear that this isn't a magic pill.
Yeah,
It's actually a daily
not even a pill.
commitment. It's not even a pill. That's right. It's a powder.
Yeah.
And daily commitment though, 6 to
Oh
12
yeah.
months. And
Yeah.
so as a programmer, how do you help people stay logged in to the protocol? They may not be seeing the results after 30 or 60 days.
Right. Well, first of all, I tell them 30, 60 days is not enough time to even
Hmm.
evaluate it. So we always
Right.
tell people it's going to take, it took me 6 months, to get to that Michael J. Fox run. Okay. But that's why you keep logs. And every month you update your logs to see how far you've gone and how
Right.
well you do. And I had to quantify, instance is a little different to quantify. In other words, you can say, okay, I didn't trip this week, or I didn't lose my balance. So you kind of know quickly, what's happening. Or
Hmm.
if they already have a walker, you know, I'm not using the walker,
Yeah.
all of a sudden. Now, Alzheimer's is a little different where that's a memory component and a form of dementia, actually, whether it's dementia or Alzheimer's. For me, I went out and bought a $12 game from Amazon where it's a kid's game where you take
Okay.
these animals, right?
Yep.
And you have a pair of each animal, and you turn the
Yeah.
cards over and you put 36 of these out, and you got to remember where they're at. Well, my wife's 15 years younger than me. And so I played her one time because I felt really sharp. My brain, I could feel I was sharp, right? That came on early, like in 3 months. I knew the Alzheimer's
Wow.
had backed off, and the blood tests proved it backed off. I challenged her to that game. She goes, I don't want to embarrass you. I'm going to beat you so bad. I don't want to do it. I said, let's go. Come on. Let's do 36 pairs. We did 36 pairs. I beat her so bad she won't play anymore.
Wow.
She said,
That's good.
forget it. That's good enough. And so I knew right then, and this is just a $12 kids game. So
Hmm.
sometimes just a memory game like that,
Yeah.
I encourage people, don't put 36 cards out if you have Alzheimer's, put 5.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
don't make it so you get frustrated. That's not the
Yeah.
point. Start taking the product, and when you can figure out doing 5, then see if you can move to 10. Then see
Hmm.
if you can play against someone else who's normal, and if you can beat them or at least tie with them or whatever. The point is you don't want people to get frustrated with it
Hmm.
because the process takes time. But also, they're going to notice being sharper. They're going to notice, I remember where I put my wallet. I remember where I put my keys. I remember why I
Yeah.
walked in this room. That's something that hit me where I walk in a room to do programming stuff. I forgot why I walked in. I couldn't even remember. I look at the screen and forgot what I was going to code. I had thought about it. I thought of the code, but now it was
Hmm.
gone. So short-term memory. I also tell people, this is very important for caregivers. Do not give the person clues. I've seen this happen so often.
Okay.
where I'll be with a caregiver and they will say, "Is this Betty in this photo?" Okay. You just gave them a clue. Dementia or Alzheimer's person will say yes. And if you say, "Is that Bruce Willis on the TV?" Yes.
Yeah.
But if you ask them, "Who is that on TV? That's your favorite actor?" I don't know.
Hmm.
And who's this in the picture? I don't know. Because you
Wow.
can't give them clues. I mean, sometimes caregivers try to be too helpful in evaluation. Don't be. Once that person
Mhm.
starts saying, "I think that's someone I remember," I think that's Betty. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, that's the
Hmm.
key, to understanding how you're progressing. And when you see that happen, I haven't had one person that has done that who has stopped a subscription. The only one person I
Wow.
had that stopped a subscription to the product, because we do it as a subscription, so they get it every month, was someone where the doctor interfered. The doctor
Uh,
jumped in and said, "Haven't heard of it, don't know what it is, I wouldn't take it." And then the
wow.
person got, "Oh, okay, I guess I won't." And I felt sorry for them,
Mhm.
because they didn't give it enough time, and the doctor was getting in the middle. And unfortunately, that doctor, as I explained to them, has 7 minutes with you in the United States on the average.
Yeah.
Two other people are in the other room, right? They don't
Yeah.
have much time to go, "Yep, sure, I wouldn't take that, bye. Okay, thank you, here's your meds, bye."
Yes.
We all been there.
You've noted that universities they couldn't figure out how to make a $10,000 a month drug. Does it bother you that the simplicity of a natural solution is exactly what makes it hard for the medical industry to embrace the product?
Well, that doesn't make me mad. What makes me mad is it got dropped on the floor.
Mhm.
Here we had something, and Big Pharma wasn't really gonna say, "Hey, we just spent all this money on research, and by the way, the natural version worked, and the one we wanted to do didn't," and announce it to the world.
Mhm.
They didn't really do that. They didn't push it. And a matter of fact, none of the groups out there, the big groups, Parkinson's groups and Alzheimer's groups, they didn't pick
Mhm.
up on it either. They're just pouring more money into big pharma, pouring more money into studies when it's like, why don't you study this? I mean,
Mhm.
they already had a hit, it worked. And that's an
Yeah.
unfortunate situation, in my opinion. That's the worst.
Yes, absolutely. So, for people listening who have a family history of dementia, maybe even ALS, do you see this more as a fire extinguisher or an active problem, or is it fireproofing for the future?
I think it does both.
Okay.
Again, if you have that predisposal, like if I had known ahead of time on my 23andMe test where it came back and said,
Hmm.
"By the way, you have the Alzheimer's gene," but they hadn't developed that test until much later,
Yeah.
I would have been more on a red flag going, "Wow, that's not good." That maybe I need to look at how to stop
Hmm.
that from going bad.
Yeah.
But they came out with that after I already was having problems, but it confirmed what the problem was.
Right.
At least I got that.
Yes.
But I think if you have active people in your people who will say, "Grandpa was not quite right, it wasn't quite right in the head, right?" Or "Grandma,
Yeah.
didn't know my name." Well, look at that as a warning sign,
Yeah.
that's genetic predisposal, that you probably are gonna get it at some point, sooner rather than later. So why not just hedge it off before it
Hmm.
gets bad? That's what the preventive, is about. And we also have to understand we have people called super agers. Those people that, just they're in their 90s, they don't have any diseases. They're perfectly
Hmm.
fine.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting, how those people function and do things, but they don't have any problem with their lymphatic systems. They
Hmm.
work.
Yeah.
So it becomes down to a thing of, wow, that becomes the holy grail, if you
Yeah.
will,
Right.
of literally that's what it's doing.
Hmm.
Okay. And I think that's the important part people need to take away from this in that regard, that whether you're trying to sharpen your brain or whether you're trying to prevent it from happening or whether you're active or a caregiver, there are two different versions we have that handle all that. And all I got to say is you got to stick with it. Give it 6 months. Make sure you log yourself.
Hmm.
If you're active, you're going to know the difference. Now, there's
Yeah.
no doubt that every I have stories that are just heartbreaking. I'll tell one. I mean,
Okay. Go for it.
there was a doctor that called me out in California, and she said, my husband and I walk behind in a nature trail, like every couple days. And I always have to hold his hand because there's rocks and the ground is not level and with slight grade on it. So I have to hold on to his hand because I have Parkinson's so bad. But I started taking your product. I've been taking it for 4 months now. And she goes, yesterday, I let go of his hand.
Mm.
And I walked back to the house, not holding his hand.
Oh.
And my first thing, because I'm just that way, I said, well, I'm sorry I broke you two up. And she was laugh, but then she goes, I love every minute, because when I got to the top of that hill, I hugged my husband and said, this is just amazing to me. And this
Yeah.
is a doctor, and she can take a look at it from that standpoint. And the other person I had was a neurosurgeon. He could take a look at it from his standpoint. Retired doctors get Parkinson's too,
Yeah.
and dementia. So it's not like they don't. So, but what I find amazing about it is that they're buying the product. And when I ask them, they're like, there is nothing else out there. So they're smart enough to know, I've been in the industry long enough. Yeah,
Yes.
you got something different.
That's right. Now, you've said that you won't stop until you are 100% better. When you reach that 100%, and I know you've been journaling and documenting everything and paying close attention, what is that first thing you want to do that the old Mark couldn't even have dreamt of doing?
Wow, that's interesting, because I feel like every month I've accomplished something. Every
Okay.
month, like I said, this fall is a 20-foot ladder, cleaning the
Yeah.
gutters, which my wife was down there just freaking out. But I knew that my balance was that good. I guess
Right.
what I want to do more is continue taking it, because I don't want it back. I think that's a universal thing.
Totally
Everybody
get that.
says, like,
Yeah.
don't. Gosh, I have people call me up and they go, "Oh, I left my bottle. I'm away for, we have snowbirds, right? So
Yeah.
they move and I forgot my stuff. Can you FedEx it down to me? I'm down in Florida or something like that, because I don't want to miss taking it." They're committed. But
Yeah.
the point being is, you don't want to stop taking it, because the problem is you do not want this to come back. These are horrible
Yeah.
things. And, we may not completely understand that maybe we've just reached the threshold where the body's starting to take over and everything else, but it's still repairing itself. If it
Yeah.
took that long to destroy 50% of your cells, maybe at 60 or 70%, you're seeing improvements and you're doing well, but that doesn't mean you're at 100%. Because we have no way to meter Parkinson's. There is no test for that says
Right.
you're this way. Alzheimer's is a little different. We can use that amyloid beta 40, or
Yes.
we can use the new Lumi Pulse, which is a little more expensive. Those are ways the blood test you and check you for that.
Right. And so then do you have like a physical activity regimen that you put yourself through each day or week?
I'm a complete couch potato.
Okay.
No, I never jogged or ran or anything like that. I don't do physical exercise. I'm 67. Pretty much, when you're programming and you're a programming development person, you're at the desk all day long
Yes.
anyway. So I still like to be sharper. Doing that kind of stuff is what I enjoy doing. Learning AI, all those kind of things. So for me, it doesn't require that. So a lot of people do exercises and stuff like that, and they do see some results, but usually that always fades. One person who called me said they could only do like 2 reps of lifting a weight. That's as far as they could go with Parkinson's.
Okay.
And when they started taking my brain restore, they got to be able to do 10 reps, which they
Wow.
wanted to accomplish.
Wow.
But that person then changed that and said, well, now, Mark, I'm going to keep taking it and see if I can do 15. They just challenge themselves, now, because now they're like, gosh, I can do that so much better. I've met Parkinson's people who can only drive with one hand like this, which is
Wow.
dangerous.
Yeah.
But they drive like that because they can't use the other hand properly. So the idea that they could use the other hand and drive with both hands in a normal fashion, that's pretty
Game
amazing.
changer.
But do you want to go back to not driving right, or, the possibility of this reversing? There's too many chemicals in the world. There's too many bad things. And I think that we have to understand what we've been given by God, what we've been given by nature, that was the remedy. And there was a reason that says the medicine is there for you. You just have to take it. But if you stop
That's right.
taking it,
Yeah,
and
that's
this
up
is
to
not a
us.
medicine, it's a natural
Right.
plant. So it's not considered a medicine.
Yeah. That's great. Mark, your story is a testament to the fact that when the experts say a system is terminal, there's often a programmer out there willing to rewrite the rules. Thank you for your tenacity and for bringing this hope to light.
Absolutely, Mike. I appreciate being on the show, and I hope your people learn from it. But more importantly,
Yes.
come to the site and read everything first. Read
Absolutely.
everything. Read my journey. Well, look at all my medical stuff. I don't mind putting it up there.
Right on. Well, that's great. And so for those of you listening, whether you're a caregiver, you're someone battling brain fog, or someone facing that same frightening diagnosis that Mark did, please don't accept that frozen screen. You can follow Mark's journey. You can find the supplements he's engineered at mybrainrestore.com. He's got those powerful FAQs in that section. They're for even your healthcare providers to look at the science for themselves.
Yep.
So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Michael Clausen. We'll see you next time on the 5 a.m. podcast. Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com. Mark Burnett's Ultra Chill Milled technology is the system update you've been waiting for. Join the 5 a.m. podcast community in reclaiming brain health. You can get started at mybrainrestore.com/5am podcast. Use this link to support the show and get your first steps towards brain restoration.